This is the last guitar build I'll post on this channel. I'm building this one completely from scratch. Body, neck, everything. I'll show you every step. But moving forward, all my guitar builds are going to live on a new channel called Julia Guitars. I want to keep Hacker Shack focused on tech, hardware, and coding. Links in the description. Let's build one last one here. I like to build my guitar bodies and necks on my CNC because it's repeatable, fast, and safe. I'll put my guitar body blank on a fixture that I designed in CAD. A lot of woodworking gurus out there will tell you if you don't mill your own wood, you're not a real woodworker. And I'd have to agree, I'm not a real woodworker. I just build guitars in my garage. So I like to buy the body blanks online. They're nice and cheap and easy to come by. It works for me. Then I'll do the blue painter's tape trick. So I put some blue painter's tape on the part, on the fixture, and some CA glue in between. This really creates a nice bond that doesn't move around when you're milling it, but it comes up really nice and easy because blue painter's tape just peels right off when you pull up the part. Then I take a 1/4 inch downcut end mill, and I'm going to index the CNC to the corner of the flip fixture. I set the corner as the origin of my machining toolpath in my CAD software. This just tells the machine where to start cutting. And so I'll set the X and Y axis offset by half the bit, and then set the Z axis to the top of that fixture. My first operation is a boring operation. It cuts out the pin locations where I'll insert those dowel pins when I flip the part over. Then I'm hogging out some material with a 3D pass. It's a 3D step down pass just to get rid of the material for the belly carve. And I'll run over it again with a 3D parallel pass and a ball end mill to smooth it out. Here are those dowel pins, and you can see me flipping the part over. Again, this is just so I don't have to re-index the machine when I flip the part. It makes it more accurate. A lot of guitar builders out there will tell you that if you don't build a guitar by hand, it's not a real guitar. And while I'd like to agree, I have built a lot of guitars by hand. The process is generally the same, but instead of a machine, the CNC that you use to cut out the body, you use a router and you use templates. It's a lot more dangerous, creates a lot more dust, and I like to keep my fingers, so I don't need to put my fingers anywhere near the spinning parts on the CNC. But if you're into the mojo of a hand-built guitar with router templates and a router, then by all means, go ahead and purchase one of those. Now I'm just doing a few more operations to cut out features for the guitar. And I use tabs to hold my guitar inside of the body blank when I cut it out. I just find that with the CA glue and the painter's tape, sometimes the outer part of the body can break loose, so it's a little bit safer. Now I'm milling out the fretboard for the guitar. Use the same CA glue, blue painter's tape trick here. The first operation will be a contour operation to cut out the shape, using that 1/4 inch downcut end mill. Then I'll cut out the inlays, I'll do the frets, I'll put a radius on the fretboard as well with a ball end mill. This one takes a long time, so I sped it up here, but I'll do 2 passes on that. For the neck, I'm using what's called roasted flame maple. It's flame maple because there's a really unique grain pattern there. When you put the oil on the neck, you'll see how it pops. It just creates this beautiful 3D effect in the grain. And it's just based on the way the wood grows. It's roasted because they extract all the moisture by putting it in an oven. I find that works really well for guitar necks, especially in Arizona when there's pretty big humidity fluctuations between the summer and winter. But it just means the neck doesn't move around and it's a really stable wood. Now I'm doing similar operations here that I did with the body, just hogging out some material with the 3D step-down pass. And then I'll go over the neck with a 3D parallel pass. And I do 2 passes here. This is the first pass, and then the second pass makes it look like this. The next step will be gluing the fretboard onto the neck. So first thing I do is just check the fit of the truss rod. Sometimes you get a little bit of fuzzies on the inside of that channel when I mill it. So I'll just clean them up with a chisel if they're anything like that. And then next thing I'll do is take it to the router table and clean up the tabs. I found that it's easier to clean up the tabs when you have a flat surface to work on versus after you attach the fretboard. It has a rounded radius, so it's a lot harder to, and more dangerous actually to mill. I use this fixture to drill the side dots onto my fretboard. The amount of money I spent on this for the amount of time it gets used is probably the highest ratio, because I believe this was like $150 tool, but I only use it for carving out these dots. So if you know of a better way to do this, I tried doing it by hand, but I always get misaligned dots, so I feel like this works a lot better. But if you have a good trick for me, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to know. I just used some mother of pearl dots on the side here. You can buy them online in bulk in packs of 100. They look really nice when they're done. Next thing I'm going to do is attach the fretboard to the neck. I always cover up the truss rod channel with a piece of tape while I'm gluing it up so I don't get any excess glue inside of the truss rod channel. It can affect the truss rod, making it more difficult to turn, so it's just always good to be safe. I also drill some indexing pins. I didn't show them here, but they're just these really small rods, and they help me align the fretboard to the neck when I glue it up. I find it just makes the glue up a little less stressful because the fretboard won't move around once I put that neck on. And then I use a vacuum bag to seal everything up. Now I'm sanding the guitar. I use my Festool sander, but any orbital sand will work just fine. I start with 120, move up to 220, and then I'll wet it down. That raises the grain and helps you get a really nice finish. So I'll sand with 220 after I raise the grain, and then 320. You don't have to go past 320. We'll do some wet sanding after we finish the guitar, and it'll get a nice finish. Putting a round over on the guitar here. I think this is like a 7/16 round over. Yeah, just put that on there, and then I will install the inlays. And you want to make sure that when you CNC mill the fretboard, the holes for the inlays are slightly bigger because you will not get them in if they're too small. I've ruined a few fretboards a few times before because I tried to mill the part a little too small, and then it was impossible to get that inlay in there. So just a quick tip, and then I'll sand the radius down just to get rid of any machining marks. Speaking of tools that are expensive for not a lot of value, here's another one. This is my thickness sander. This was a really expensive tool. It was a few $100, and all I use it for is sanding the thickness of the headstock, as you can see here. That's all I use it for. I'm sure it has other uses too, but I just don't use it for anything else. The next step will be painting the guitar, and I'm always very cautious when I paint guitars because the paint that I use is called nitrocellulose. It has a lot of VOCs in it. You don't want it on your skin. You don't want to breathe it in. So I always get dressed up in my full Breaking Bad outfit with the bodysuit and the respirator. But first thing I'll do here is just put a coat of sanding sealer on the guitar. This will just fill any little micro pores in the wood. Although this wood is called swamp ash, and a lot of the guitar purists out there will tell you, oh, you should have pore filled that swamp ash. Pore filling is basically just filling in the pores in the grain so that they don't show through the paint. I thought it would look pretty cool if the grain showed through the paint, so I decided not to pore fill it. Let me know if that was a bad choice down in the comments. After I get that base coat sanded down a bit, I'll come back and I'll put on a white primer coat. And I do this because the color coat is metallic, and you want a nice even base for your metallic base coat. Otherwise, it'll look blotchy. First coat, as you can see there, is always a little bit blotchy with color. It's just because of the way the rattle can sprays it. Rattle cans are probably my favorite way of spraying guitars. They're cheap, you can throw them away, you don't have to clean anything up. While that's drying, I'll just drill some holes in the back of my neck for where it will bolt onto the guitar. And then the next step will be reaming out the holes for the tuners. So the tuners have some bushings, which the diameter of those bushings is larger than the diameter of the holes that I cut. So I just ream them out so they're a little larger, and I can press those bushings in later. Then I'll go over to my fret radiusing jig, and I'll just pass it through here. This fretboard is a 9.5 inch radius. So I just need to make sure that that's 9.5. And then this fretboard is a little bit harder to press the frets in than a typical fretboard because the edges of the frets will be hidden. If you notice there, I didn't machine the fret slot to go the entire width of the fretboard. There's a little bit of a edge on that. And so the reason why I do that is so you don't see the side of the tang when I press the fret in. So I basically just clip the sides off, file it down, and then press it in. I use an arbor press. Found this online. It was pretty cheap, like 50 bucks or something like that. Works just fine. You can get more expensive ones, but they all do the same thing. This part is definitely one of the most time-consuming parts. Just keep pressing 21 frets. After I get everything pressed in, I need to do some cleanup on the neck. So when I machine these parts, usually the CNC can't do like compound cuts or what you call 5-axis cuts. So you get these edges on the sides of the neck that you need to clean up with a chisel and a rasp. So I'll just shape these so that they feel a little bit nicer when you hold it. I start with the chisel, I'll use a rasp, then I'll use a file, and I'll move down to some sandpaper. There's no real strategy here. I just do what feels right. You know, take it up, hold it. If it doesn't feel good, maybe I'll sand it down a little bit more. You want to just make sure it feels nice when you're playing it. And then I'll end up taking it to the drum sander, just clean up a little bit more. And this is a lot faster than doing it by hand, but I find that the handwork just makes it feel a little bit better. Next, I need to clean up the machining lines. So I'll take some sandpaper starting at 120 and moving all the way up to 800 grit. And I will just basically run the sandpaper across the entire neck, and I'll just keep doing it until I get through all the grits. I like to use the orbital sander on the headstock and also the base. Is that what this is called? The base of the guitar. And it's just a lot faster and it keeps it nice and flat, so I don't have to worry about, you know, potentially putting in a curve on those flat parts. This is probably my favorite part, but also can be the most frustrating part. It's where I finish the neck. And the reason why it can be frustrating is because if you have a scratch that you didn't sand out in an earlier step, you have to stand off all of the finish and start over. But if you get it right the first time, which is a rare occurrence, it can come out like this. And this is really where that grain starts to pop and it looks beautiful. Of the parts building a guitar that I don't like, this probably has to be the top one, and it's sanding out all of the orange peel that I get when I clear coat the guitar. So when you spray clear coat, you get this texture on the finish called orange peel, and you have to sand it out. So I'll sand it out with some 800 grit. And this is definitely my least favorite part, and here's the reason why, is because you can sand through the finish like this. This is actually where I decided that I wanted to relic the guitar. What you can do is you can respray it, but with the metallic colors, it's much more difficult than the solid colors. So at this point, I was so far along, I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm just gonna relic this guitar. I think it'll look cool because it has some open grain finish. So that's what I ended up doing. I'm installing the thimbles for the bridge here and just pulling off some of the tape and the fixture that I used to hold the guitar while I was spraying it. The guitar building industry, we call beating up the guitar or aging the guitar relicing it. And I think it's the only part of the guitar building process where screwing it up might actually raise the resale value of it. Right here, I'm just hitting the guitar with some cold compressed air, and this is what checks the lacquer. I'll put an image of it on the screen here, but basically just creates these lines in the lacquer, which makes it look old. When you take a guitar and with some nitro lacquer on it and you put it in a cold place, it'll crack the finish, so that's what this is doing. But going back to my analogy, the people that do love it are willing to pay a lot of money for it. So see, all the really high-end guitars have a relic finish. And, you know, as a guitar builder, I think a lot of that just comes from laziness. It's a lot easier if you make a mistake while finishing a guitar, say a piece of dust landed in it, to just chip it out with a little razor blade than actually refinish that whole portion of the guitar. But I think it does look pretty cool. And right here, I'm just taking some rocks and beating up the sides of the guitar. The key with relicing is you want to add the aging marks to places where you would actually see aging marks on a guitar. Maybe this bottle cap impression on the top is not the best example, but usually, you know, I like to put marks on the bottom where you might set it down on the ground, maybe on the sides where you would scratch it from picking the guitar, or on the belly carve on the back where your shirt's rubbing against it, or maybe on the forearm carve on the front where your elbow or arm is rubbing against it while you're playing. It doesn't have to be perfect, just enough so that each little mark could tell a story of something that happened to the guitar. like to use a razor blade to scrape away the paint for the larger sections. And then I'll come back with some sandpaper and just smooth it out. For me, this is what really sells the effect. Like I was mentioning earlier, if you just scrape away the finish, it's not going to look realistic. But if you sand it out and make it look like it was worn off with your elbow, it's definitely going to kind of help sell that realism look. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll take some buffing compound and I'll just buff out those areas where the paint was worn away. I think this just adds that extra 5% of realism because those areas would naturally get buffed out from your clothing as you're playing the guitar. Now I'm just starting to install some of the hardware. These are some Relic strap buttons. And I use the Relic'd hardware when I do a Relic on the guitar because it just makes everything a little bit more cohesive and sells the effect. And now I'm going back to the neck. So if you ever look at the frets on a neck, you'll notice that the edges of the frets are actually beveled inwards. And this just helps so that when you're playing the guitar, your hand doesn't get cut on some of those frets. And then speaking of your hand getting cut on frets, I'll take a file and just knock down the edges of those frets. This is where it really helps the guitar play a lot better. You just want to make sure you round out any of those sharp edges. I'll first do the base of the fret and then I'll round out the tops as well. Now I'm rolling the fretboard edges. So to do this, I'll take a razor and just scrape out the edges at a 45-degree angle. And then I'll take some sandpaper and just round those edges out. And to me, this really makes the neck feel great. Like, I really enjoy playing a neck with a rounded edge. It just, something about it just is nice and smooth, easy to play. When you install the frets on a guitar, they're usually not all 100% level with each other. So I'm just taking this really flat beam and I have some sandpaper on the bottom, I believe it's 400 grit. I just sand out all the frets so that they're flat and even with each other. And to make sure I do that properly, I just mark everything up with a blue Sharpie. When you do that, you get these flat spots on top. So I'll go back over with the blue Sharpie and then use this cheap crowning file. And when I say cheap, I think this is like an $80 crowning file from Stuback, but I'll use this to just crown out the tops of the frets so that there's a nice pointy edge. It doesn't cause any intonation issues. And then I'll go through my micromesh pads. These are really fine-grained sandpaper pads. And I'll just go over all the frets and polish them up. This makes the frets really smooth and easy to play. It gets rid of any sharp facets that were created when we sanded out those frets and filed them down. Also do it on the edge, just to continue that round over. Now we start the assembly process. Bring it over to my drill press. I just use a drill press to press in some bushings that we'll use to hold the tuners in place. I use vintage tuners. Really like vintage tuners because they're just really easy to string up. And then to install them, I don't like to machine the screw holes for these because I find that sometimes the parts aren't always exactly to spec. So I'll just kind of line them up and I'll use this straight edge to drill all the holes in. I just screw them in. I usually start in the middle screw and work my way outwards. Usually gets me the best results. Going back to my CNC now, and I'm milling out a pick guard for this. You might ask me, why don't you just buy a pick guard? It'd be a lot cheaper and you wouldn't have to mill it yourself. And to that I would say, that's a good idea, I should probably do that. Now I'm taking some shielding paint and shielding the inside of the cavities. This is just to prevent any unwanted hum or buzz. What it does is create a Faraday cage inside of the guitar so that you can make sure that there's no unwanted noise picked up by the pickups. Hey guys, just checking in now that we're close to the end of the build. We got the body done. And we got the neck done. So it's time to assemble. I use this StewMac shim in order to give a little bit bigger of a angle on the neck. So I mill them flat, but this gives me a 0.5 degree angle on the neck, which helps me raise the bridge up a little bit. With these offset guitars, you want to make sure that the bridge is a little higher than something like a Tele, just because you want more break angle over that bridge so you get less ringing out under the bridge. I'm also using a descendant vibrato, which helps with that a bit, but it's always nice to get more break angle. This is my ground wire. You always want to make sure that your guitar strings are grounded, and it prevents any buzzing as well. Here's that descendant vibrato that I was talking about. Really love these vibratos. I'll link them in the description. I use them on all my offset builds. I'm using Lawler pickups. I believe that these are P90 pickups actually in the Jazzmaster pickup enclosure, and the bridge is I think it's a high wound. Is that what they call it? A high wound pickup, but it gives me a little bit more output. I really like how it sounds. Now I'm just wiring everything up. And for Jazzmasters, I like to use pre-wired kits. Again, the guitar gurus are going to yell at me because I didn't solder all the electronics for this, but it's just so much to solder, and also buying the parts individually is kind of a pain because you have to buy them in bulk. So I just end up usually buying the kits and just, soldering my pickups in. Works pretty well for me. Attaching the pickguard is definitely the most satisfying part of the assembly process, is when you go from looking incomplete to a real guitar. And now we're just going to adjust the bridge. So I adjust the posts on this bridge to get a little bit of a tighter fit so it's not wobbling around. And I'll adjust the height of the bridge so that it's roughly a little bit higher than the bridge pickup. Now I'm installing the nut. I like to use tusk nuts, and what's nice about tusk nuts is they're also pre-manufactured for you, so you don't have to cut them out. It's a real pain to cut out a bone nut. I don't like doing it, but I also like the sound of the tusk nuts. They're a lot brighter than a bone nut would be, and I really enjoy that. It also, I feel like it just rings out a lot better, and they're self-lubricating, so they're really good with the vibratos. Now I string this up before I glue in the nut. I typically use 10 gauge strings. Sometimes I'll use 11s for offsets, but I've been really liking 10 gauge recently, so that's why I chose to use on this one. So the strings will act as a nice little clamp on the nut when we go to glue it in. I'll just add a little bit of wood glue on this. I actually probably added a little bit too much. You don't need a lot, just enough to hold it in. If you ever have to replace it, if you CA glue it in, it's a real pain in the butt to get out, so I always recommend using wood glue. I'm just tensioning those strings to hold the nut in place, and we'll let it dry overnight. Once it's dry, I will take a file and file down the edges. What's crazy to me is I played a lot of really expensive guitars, and the first thing I look at is the nut. There's a lot of guitars out there that for some reason they just don't take the time to file down the nut so that it's perfectly flush with the side of the neck, which is just crazy to me. It's such an easy process, and it just makes it feel so much better. Yeah, it's usually what I do is I take a file and then some sandpaper, and I'll go over it again with some True Oil to make it just all flow together. Now we begin the setup process, and I use this very inexpensive gauge from StewMac to check the height of the strings. And you should always make sure that it goes from 1.65 millimeters on the low E string to 1.15 millimeters on the high E string to get the best action and playability. These pre-cut nuts, the nut slots are usually a little bit higher than they should be, so I'll go through with some nut slot files and just file them down a little bit. Now I'm adjusting the truss rod, and it had a little bit too much relief, so I'm just knocking that out by turning counterclockwise. Then I'll install the string tree. Like the nut, this is also a tusk string tree. and I'll install the classic Julia logo here. I get these from a guy on Etsy. I might end up switching and make this a inlaid logo instead, but I like the metal ones for now. It gives it kind of a cool look. Last thing for the setup will be adjusting the tension on the vibrato. I like a floating vibrato. I think it just has a good feel, but some people like it locked off. And then I'll install that vibrato arm. That's all for this video. If you've enjoyed, make sure to subscribe to my other channel, Julia Guitars. But until then, I'll leave you with one last sound demo of the guitar.